would say to the investigator. Mrs. Norris had been the first to be attacked this year, this god, and unfortunately, Harry, Ron, and Hermione had been the first on the scene. Filch was certain it was their fault that his precious pet had turned to stone. "Go talk to him, Harry," Ron said anxiously, leaning close. Harry understood what Ron meant. He should speak to Mr. Breen before the majority of the students in the castle had a chance to report him. Hermione had given the same advice at the infirmary the previous night, but Harry had refused. There were many reasons. He feared that if he admitted to anyone that he heard a strange, terrifying voice before each attack, urging murder, he'd be seen as insane. He also didn't want poor Dobby, the house elf, to be questioned or punished because of Harry's testimony. But besides these concerns, what could he even say? How could he defend himself? And yet, bypassing Dumbledore to go straight to an investigator he barely knew felt off. Shakily, Harry left the entrance hall and headed toward the dormitory. He didn't even glance at Malfoy, who was laughing loudly about delivering a fresh batch of fertilizer to Professor Sprout. Behind him, Fred and George exchanged a perfectly timed glance, each seeing the same thought reflected in the other's eyes. Chapter 2, The Failed Conversation, Part 1. Ultimately, Harry decided to follow Hermione's advice and speak with Amostar Brain. Otherwise, he feared that even before the chamber's monster turned anyone else to stone, the stares and rumors around him would drive him mad. He returned to the dormitory, changed into clean clothes, and combed his hair meticulously in the mirror, trying to appear less rebellious. "You're wasting your effort, dear," the gold-patterned mirror in the dorm huffed. "Thanks for the reminder," Harry replied with an annoyed expression. He intentionally set out for Mr. Law Breen's office before dinner, hoping to avoid too many curious or mocking glances along the way. Still, on the third floor, he unexpectedly ran into the castle caretaker, Argus Filch. Filch looked as if he'd just finished crying. His alarmingly large eyes were red, and snot dripped down from his ugly nose to his double chin. When he spotted Harry, he quickly wiped away his pitiful expression and fixed him with a venomous glare, like a wounded hyena. "Someone will get what they deserve, Potter. Very soon." "What do you mean, Mr. Filch?" Harry's voice was weak, as if his throat had been clamped shut. He desperately wanted to understand Filch's intentions, but unfortunately, after a string of cold, cruel laughs, Filch simply turned and left. There was no doubt about it. Filch was going to report him. Harry couldn't lie to himself. His heart pounded wildly, and every instinct screamed at him to turn and flee. He feared the investigator had already received Filch's report, and that walking into Brain's office of his own accord would be walking straight into a trap. Yet in the end, he knocked on the door. After all, this was someone who had gone toe-to-toe with Dumbledore back in 5th year. If Brain had decided to throw Harry in prison, there was no one, except Dumbledore, who could save him. Once granted permission, Harry opened the office door himself, standing at the threshold, trembling as he surveyed the room, half expecting a rope to shoot across the room and bind him instantly. Aside from Dumbledore's uniquely circular office, Brain's office was the largest Harry had ever seen. Not that it was surprising, it had been converted from a classroom. The fireplace built into the wall beneath the inset windows cast a warm glow over the room. At the far end, a desk, bookshelves, and a simple cot were arranged neatly. The air carried a strange, lingering scent, as if Brain had been brewing potions there. What drew Harry's gaze most was the wall to his right as he entered. A massive black curtain covered it completely, though faint glimmers of light shimmered behind it. Somehow, it reminded Harry of a Muggle cinema. Even though he had never been to one with the Dursleys, he had seen glimpses on television. "So, you intend to just stand there and speak to me, Mr. Potter?" Brain's voice was calm, a gentle smile playing on his lips from behind the desk. "Oh, sorry, Mr. Brain." Harry hurriedly closed the door and stepped inside, stammering as he approached the desk. I was just curious about that wall." "Understandable," Brain replied warmly. He gestured for Harry to sit while he moved to the fireplace to make tea. "I don't have anything particularly special to offer, but if you don't mind, tea will have to do, Mr. Potter." As Brain returned with the tea, Harry's eyes were drawn to a framed photograph on the desk. It showed an elderly man posing with Brain. The older gentleman seemed significant, perhaps a close relative, but What caught Harry's attention was the younger Brain in the picture. He looked slightly off. "Thank you," Harry said, taking the steaming cup, his eyes flicking quickly to Brain's slightly worn features. And then he understood why the younger version had seemed odd. The Brain in the photograph had warm brown eyes, similar to Hermione's, yet the investigator sitting before him had a strikingly pale lavender gaze. Magic, perhaps? Harry wondered briefly, but immediately shook off the thought. Now was not the time for such speculation. "Were you wondering why my eye color seems unusual?" Brain asked, leaning back in his chair, the faint mist from the tea blurring his expression slightly. The tone, however, was calm and curious, not accusing. "Well, not exactly," Harry stammered, embarrassed. The young wizard's nervousness made Brain chuckle softly. No matter how famous Harry Potter was or how bright his future might be, in that moment, he still appeared as inexperienced and raw as any second-year student in Brain's eyes. "I imagine you've already met Mr. Filch, haven't you?" Brain said, sipping the bitter tea gently. At that moment, Harry recalled the abrupt encounter during Christmas break, when he, Ron, and Hagrid had run into Brain near Professor McGonagall's office. Ron had remarked that Brain reminded him a lot of Dumbledore. Harry hadn't thought much of it then, but now he saw the truth in Ron's words. Unlike Snape or McGonagall, whose presence alone radiated authority and severity, Brain's intimidating effect came from his calm, composed, and forgiving demeanor. It was a natural confidence that pressed down on you so heavily it made resistance feel impossible. "Yes, Mr. Brain, I saw Filch. He looked like he just had a good cry," Harry admitted hesitantly. "And what do you think that was about, Mr. Potter?" Brain asked, blowing away the floating leaves on his tea, his tone interested rather than impatient. Harry's gaze wandered over the old worn collar of Brain's wizarding robes. He said nothing. The answer was self-evident. Seeing that the tense atmosphere had been set, Amostar had no intention of scaring Harry further. He set down his teacup, ready to get straight to the point. But unexpectedly, the usually timid Harry summoned his courage, his resilient emerald eyes locking onto Amostar's. "Mr. Breen, do you really think I'm the heir of Slytherin? That I opened the Chamber of Secrets?" Chapter 33, The Failed Conversation, Part 2. Harry watched nervously as Amostar leaned back in thought. His hands clutched his robes tightly on his knees, and the courage he had built up dissolved the moment he asked the question. What would Mr. Breen say? Deep down, Harry wanted to believe that this unusually perceptive investigator wouldn't blindly trust the rumors circulating in the school. But what if he was pressured by the Board of Governors and felt compelled to produce a culprit? "If you're asking my personal opinion, Potter," Amostar began to speak, and Harry's knuckles whitened from gripping his robe so tightly. "I personally don't think you're the one who opened the chamber, Mr. Potter." Harry's eyes went wide. His heart soared as if he were flying on a broomstick for the first time through crisp, chilly clouds, light, free, and exhilarated. Even the dim office seemed to brighten and expand around him. "But why, sir?" Yet, instinctively, Harry pressed on. "Because of my parcel tongue, everyone knows Slytherin himself spoke it." Amostar chuckled, subtly glancing at Harry's scar before relaxing his expression. "Parseltongue means nothing, Mr. Potter. In the 1,000 years since Salazar Slytherin's time, there have been dozens of wizards with the ability. I can't assume you have some secret connection to the great founder of Slytherin House just because of it." Seeing Harry's face brighten, Amostar teased further. And there are plenty of other facts I can't ignore. For instance, if Salazar Slytherin really wanted an heir, why would he choose someone from Gryffindor? And consider this, the boy who lived defeated the most evil dark wizard at the age of 1, saved the British magical community from despair, fear, and death, and was regarded by the greatest and wisest contemporary wizard, Albus Dumbledore, as his prized student. How could such a person ever attack his fellow students at school? Harry grinned. He realized he was starting to like Amostar Brain. Since entering the wizarding world, many had used Harry's defeat of Voldemort to judge him. Some revered him, some dismissed him as a showy little wizard, some hated him, and some were indifferent. But every mention of it had weighed on him. Mr. Breen was the exception. From his tone, Harry could hear neither malice nor excessive reverence, just playful, respectful teasing, as if they were discussing a harmless little spell. Honestly, before meeting Mr. Breen, Harry had never imagined he would one day have such an enjoyable conversation with a Slytherin-born wizard. And if you're worried because of the notice I posted, Mr. Potter, there's really no need. Amasta stood and poured himself another cup of strong tea. Seeing that Harry hadn't touched his own, he didn't press the matter further. Outside the window, the night had fallen completely, with only Hagrid's cabin faintly lit in the Forbidden Forest. From the start, I never expected to gain any useful information from people's reports. Amasta leaned against the fireplace, forcing Harry to twist his body just to see him. Before Harry could ask anything, Brain began to speak. To be honest, I initially thought that once news spread that I, as an investigator, had entered Hogwarts to examine the Chamber of Secrets, anyone operating in the shadows would react in some way, Brain explained. After all, someone bold enough to cause trouble right under Dumbledore's nose isn't likely to tolerate a relatively unknown investigator sent by the Board of Governors. You understand what I mean, Mr. Potter? Harry furrowed his brow, thinking it over carefully. Then he relaxed slightly and nodded. Brain's point was clear. If the heir of Slytherin didn't react to the investigator's presence, people might assume the heir was intimidated. And someone who had dared to attack young wizards twice under Dumbledore's watch wouldn't likely tolerate such a slight. Satisfied, Brain blinked and continued, I anticipated that he might act impulsively again, giving me a chance to catch him in the act. Harry rolled his eyes subtly. How could someone who spent all day holed up in an office, never patrolling, actually catch anyone in the act? The ideal scenario, Brain added with a slight sigh, would be for the attacker to come straight to me to prove their skill. Then I could deal with them and collect the reward. Resolve the threat. Brain's lips curved into a small frown of mild frustration. But he's been far more cautious than I anticipated. I've been monitoring the castle for a week, yet found nothing unusual. It's a bit unsettling, so I had to take some action to provoke this patient infiltrator. Harry understood. Posting the notice had simply been a test. Brain wanted the heir to see it as a provocation, to push them to continue their great Slytherin endeavor. Realizing this, Harry felt an enormous sense of relief. If Brain believed in his innocence, the school rumors could do at least half as much damage because Harry's greatest fear was that Brain would take them seriously. In that case, Harry said excitedly, standing up, Mr. Brain, if you don't think I did this, could you... maybe you could post another notice to explain. To declare your innocence? Brain smiled. Is that why you came to see me, Mr. Potter? Heh, I thought, like Filch, you might be here to report someone. Harry flushed with embarrassment. He had expected his request to be denied, but pressed on nonetheless. You probably already know, because of Parseltongue, the young wizards are convinced I attacked Colin, Finley, and Mrs. Norris. Everywhere I go, everyone assumes... Well, anyway... He trailed off, noticing Brain's smile fade and the shaking of his head. I understand your predicament, Mr. Potter, but I cannot grant your request, Brain said calmly. Standing before him, famous or not, or even considering the mysterious memory left behind, did not sway him. Just as I don't assume you are the attacker based on rumors, I cannot, without indisputable evidence, tell everyone that you are completely innocent. That would be irresponsible, Mr. Potter. I hope you understand. The depth and intensity in Brain's gaze pressed down on Harry, making it impossible to continue his plea. Then Brain's words made Harry tense once more. Moreover, there are things you must explain yourself. For example, the night of last Halloween, during the first attack, why you, Mr. Weasley, and Miss Granger appeared on the third-floor corridor after attending Nearly Headless Nick's Death Day party. That is indeed puzzling. Chapter 34. The Twins' Plan. Amasta watched Harry Potter leave his office, looking a little disappointed, and realized that he hadn't managed to extract a single hint of the secrets Harry was keeping. This didn't surprise him. Wizards at this age were naturally sensitive, and given Harry's Slytherin heritage, even he wouldn't have trusted a stranger over Dumbledore with the kind of information Harry was withholding. Still, from his earlier probing, Amasta confirmed that Harry was hiding something extremely important, something that, if known, would have made the situation far less precarious. Perhaps I need to figure out a way to earn his trust, Amasta muttered, staring at the shifting light patterns on the ceiling. If this air never slipped up, how was he supposed to proceed? He had considered creating a potion to impersonate Colin or Justin, spreading the word that the petrified students had regained consciousness and providing crucial clues about the culprit. All he would need to do was show the face of the impersonated student briefly, then hide in the infirmary until no one suspected a thing. It was a good idea, except for one flaw. If Colin and Justin hadn't seen the culprit's face before being petrified, the trick might not scare the real attacker at all. "Let's wait a little longer," he murmured, withdrawing his gaze. He swiped a finger across the surveillance wall, silently drawing back the curtain. Watching the shifting figures, he muttered, "If there's still no progress, I guess I'll just have to cozy up to the main trio." Harry, leaving Mr. Breen's office, made his way back to the Gryffindor Tower. He had originally planned to recount the conversation to Hermione, but on second thought, there seemed to be no urgent need to draw on her insight. He already had the key answer. Mr. Breen would not blindly trust school rumors, and he would not punish anyone in the castle without solid evidence. That was enough for Harry. As for the terrifying voice and Dobby's warnings, Harry thought, since Breen had refused to clear him, revealing those details wouldn't change the outcome, and might only make him look more suspicious. Besides, if anyone needed to know, it should be Dumbledore. Passing through the doorway past the fat lady's portrait, Harry thought that firmly. Except for Percy, the rest of the Weasley siblings were sprawled on the soft sofas beneath a bright crystal chandelier. Seeing Harry, they all visibly relaxed and waved, which warmed his heart. "So, Harry, did Breen give you any trouble over Filch?" Ron asked, standing to hand him a cup of pumpkin juice. "Better than I expected, Ron," Harry said with a smile. 20 minutes later, after he had recounted the entire conversation, the Weasleys visibly relaxed, their earlier tension easing. "Oh, the investigator is smarter than we thought. George, looks like we'll need to tweak our plan," muttered Fred, looking a bit disappointed. "We were going to give him a proper scare." "Don't even think about it, Fred," Harry said anxiously. "Breen isn't like Lockhart. He's not that easy to handle." "Trust the professionals, Harry," George said smugly. "We never fail." "What exactly are you planning?" Ron asked, interested. "Egging his office." When Harry confirmed that he wouldn't be mysteriously expelled from school anytime soon, Ginny's pale, sleep-deprived face regained a little color. She lowered her hand from her chest with a sigh, though soon her breathing quickened again, showing she was still nervous. "That Mr. Breen, he's monitoring the school," she said. "But how does he even do it? I mean, he hardly ever leaves his office." It was a perplexing question, and Harry had no answer. Yet his instinct told him Breen wasn't lying. They discussed it at length, eventually concluding that it probably had something to do with the wall behind the curtain. "Looks like we'll have to pay him a visit ourselves, Fred," George said at the end of the discussion, raising an eyebrow and grinning mischievously at his brother. "Of course, George. Aside from the two of us, I doubt anyone else would dare sneak into his office unnoticed." Fred winked at George. After everyone else had left, Fred leaned close and whispered, "Think Brain might have a copy of that too?" "Shut up, Fred," George hissed, glancing nervously at Percy, who was struggling to climb into the common room. "Tomorrow we'll get this all sorted out." Tuesday morning, Gryffindor's third years had Professor Flitwick for charms. Today, he was introducing a spell guaranteed to leave people rolling on the floor laughing, the cheering charm. At the final movement of the spell, your wand must make a subtle flick upwards. "This is crucial, ladies and gentlemen," Flitwick instructed sharply from the podium, voice squeaky but precise. "Otherwise, when you regain consciousness, you'll find yourself lying on the floor with a black-furred baboon standing on your chest. What are you two up to now?" Angelina noticed Fred and George weren't practicing the spell on each other. Instead, their heads were bent over a piece of parchment, yellowed with age, the writing on it shifting as if alive. "Peeking at someone's secrets is despicable, Katie. I won't let a despicable person be on my team," Fred said, turning his head to block her view. Then he subtly signaled George, who immediately pulled an orange-yellow candy from his sleeve. "If I die because of this, Fred, remember to bury my body in Filch's office," George said with a grin. 3 minutes later, the noisy classroom was plunged into silence by a series of ear-piercing screams. A jet of bright red liquid shot from both of George's nostrils, leaving everyone stunned. Flitwick rushed over, horrified at George's state and the large bloodstains on Fred's robe. For no, George, whoever you two are, can someone explain what on earth is happening? He's dying, Fred wailed, supporting George, who looked pale as a sheet. Can I at least bury my dear brother somewhere? No one's dying, Weasley, Flitwick snapped. Take him to Madame Pomfrey immediately. If you manage it in time, I expect you back here to practice the cheering charm. This lesson is important, Weasley, because Flitwick's sentence trailed off as the moment he allowed them to leave. Both Weasleys sprang to life and bolted out of the classroom without looking back, leaving Flitwick standing amid a messy pool of blood. Since it was class time, the castle was mostly empty. Fred and a nose-bleeding George dashed toward the fourth floor. Fred suggested he check Brain's office while George went to the infirmary for basic treatment. We haven't made an antidote for this yet, George. It could drain all your blood, Fred warned. No way, Fred. You're not taking all the credit, George shouted, clutching his nose as he barreled toward the third floor. Based on their observations over the past few days, Amostar Brain only left his mysterious office between 10:30 to 11 a.m. and 4 to 4:30 p.m., first to the kitchen for a bite, then to the prefect's bathroom for a quick soak before rushing back. Breaking the protective enchantments on the office door was far easier than the twins expected. A simple alohomora opened everything. The twins crept inside, observing the office's simple furnishings. Nothing seemed particularly noteworthy. Fred and George exchanged excited looks in front of the black curtain. Countdown 3, 2, 1, and let's unveil this mysterious veil together. Chapter 35, Caught Red-Handed. Please tell me this isn't a dream, George. When the black curtain was pulled back and the wall of flickering, shifting images appeared before the twins, their confidence in having successfully infiltrated a mysterious investigator's office vanished in an instant. They froze, staring at the wall in disbelief, rubbing their eyes as if they were muggles witnessing real magic for the first time. Their expressions were both absurd and comical. Sorry, mate. George Weasley's lips barely moved as he whispered, blinking rapidly, trying to process the incredible invention before them. I can't promise anything, but I think we've just figured out how Mr. Breen monitors all of Hogwarts from his office. This is insane. Yeah, insane, Fred muttered, sounding dazed. He lowered his head to glance at the parchment filled with shifting words in his hands, then returned his gaze to the grid-like images on the wall, his breathing growing heavier. Our Marauder's map doesn't even come close to this. But I still don't understand. How on earth does he do all of this? It took the twins about 10 minutes just to pull themselves out of their shock. Once they finally regained some composure, their first instinct was to throw themselves against the wall, wishing they could sink their eyes right into it. Excitement made George's nose bleed again, though it had mostly stopped earlier. He barely noticed his pale, woozy face, entirely absorbed in analyzing how Breen had managed to create such a revolutionary invention. I'd bet Percy's prefect badge on it, Fred. There's some insanely advanced transfiguration at work here. George's eyes shone with admiration as his fingers jabbed at the wall, scanning the entire surface. There must be an alchemical device, he continued, something that transfers images from around the castle onto this enchanted wall and reconstructs them into something understandable. Not just that, Fred interjected loudly. Look at the angles of these images, George. He's got hundreds of alchemical devices installed for surveillance all over the castle. Damn it, what kind of thing could do all that? The twins debated non-stop in front of the wall, analyzing the possible magical techniques involved. Eventually, they reached the same conclusion. This surveillance system drew on multiple magical disciplines, and the knowledge required was far beyond what they could comprehend. Do you think, if we asked nicely, he'd teach us how he does it? Fred said hopefully, eyes glued to the wall, suddenly finding their treasured Marauder's map almost uninteresting. There's one problem, mate, George said, covering his nose, his face grim. If Mr. Breen stays in his office monitoring everyone, doesn't that mean? The twins exchanged a glance and realized it. Their midnight excursions around the castle last week were likely observed in full by Mr. Breen. He didn't report us to Professor McGonagall. Maybe he just happened to be asleep when we snuck out, Fred said, looking uneasy. Even he had trouble believing that possibility. No matter why Breen hadn't exposed them, now was not the time to dwell on it. In about 10 minutes, Amostar Breen would finish getting ready and return to the surveillance room. After pulling the curtain closed, Fred, still woozy, helped George toward the door. But when his hand touched the doorknob and turned it, his expression fell. "I've got some extremely interesting information, George. I can't wait to share it with you." "I'm dying to know what that interesting information is, Fred." George squinted, holding his head. "But I'd prefer if you waited until I was lying in Madame Pomfrey's infirmary bed before telling me, Fred." "Can't wait that long." Fred twisted the knob harder, but as expected, the bronze handle didn't budge. "I think we've walked right into an ambush." A silent, eerie stillness descended. The twins awkwardly exchanged glances, each seeing the same unmistakable sparkle of foolishness in the other's eyes. Being entrusted by the Board of Governors to investigate the dangerous chamber opener meant that the wizard sent into Hogwarts had to be exceptionally skilled. There was no way such a wizard would be careless enough to leave such an important surveillance office unprotected. 10 seconds later, the rescue operation began. George broke free from Fred's support. Standing 3 feet apart, they both drew their wands, locked eyes resolutely, and shouted together, "Splinter and shatter!" A ripple of ghostly light shimmered across the polished doorknob, then vanished, leaving the door completely unchanged. "Blast it, this cunning fellow!" Fred ground his teeth. "He planned all along to catch any little wizard who tried to break into his office, didn't he?" Undeterred, the twins tried again and again, but it was useless. Every spell was repelled by the powerful protective enchantments on the door. Frustrated, Fred glanced at the parchment in his hand, then resorted to the most primal method. He tried to force the door open with brute strength. "Stop being foolish, Fred." George's eyes darted around, finally landing on a window on the wall facing the forbidden forest. "Come on, brother. Maybe we can escape through here." "Are you insane, George?" Fred's eyes widened in disbelief. "This is the 3rd floor. I'd rather get caught by the investigator and handed over to Professor McGonagall than jump and break my neck." Despite his protests, Fred ran after George and reached the window. After another chaotic flurry of scrambling, the twins collapsed on the floor in utter defeat. "Can you believe it, George?" Fred tore at his hair in frustration. "Who in their right mind would put protective enchantments on a window?" Amasta emerged from the prefect's bathroom, hair still dripping, clearly in a good mood. Passing the Polly statue, he even hummed a tuneless little melody. Honestly, he regretted not requesting to be a prefect back in school. Being a prefect came with privileges that ordinary students could only dream of. For instance, the bathroom he'd been using was entirely lined with luxurious white marble, large enough to rival a swimming pool, enough to make anyone envious. The only downside, the mermaid painting on the wall always peeked at him, watching his 8-pack while he rested, leaving Amasta slightly embarrassed. With 2 minutes until the young wizard's class ended, Amasta strolled leisurely from the 6th floor to the 3rd. At his office door, he drew his wand from his sleeve, smiling brightly. "Well then, it's time to unveil the person responsible for these crimes." And here I am, still no warm-up push, not thrilled. Chapter 36, Letting Go. In Amasta's office, Fred was honestly explaining why they had broken in, while George lay on Amasta's bed, groaning softly. After taking the restorative potion Amasta had prepared, spiked with poisonous tentacle seeds, George's nosebleed finally stopped. "Professor McGonagall did warn me to watch out for you two." Amasta sat in his office chair, a wry expression on his face as he listened to Fred. "But she only said that if I noticed you wandering around the castle at night, I shouldn't be too shocked. She never mentioned the possibility of you breaking into my office. I must say your luck is extraordinary. Considering the chamber opener might very well be a young wizard, the protective magic I left here focuses mainly on confinement. If I were outside as usual..." Amasta fixed the twins with a stern gaze and a harsh tone. At this point, perhaps Headmaster Dumbledore would already be writing a letter of condolence to your parents. Even without his warning, the twins realized the recklessness of their actions. Amostar Brain was no Hogwarts professor. They shouldn't have barged in without understanding his temperament. George, looking drained from losing so much blood, managed to sit up at Amasta's words, giving a pitiful plea. Teach. No, Mr. Brain, please don't mention this to Professor McGonagall. We promise. It's the last time. Fred eagerly nodded in agreement. Please, Mr. Brain, while trapped earlier, George and I already agreed. We'll reform and become rule-abiding, studious wizards. Can you give us a break? Amasta rolled his eyes, almost laughing at the pair. Did they really look that foolish? Well, anyway, he didn't give them an immediate answer. Leaning back in his chair, fingers interlaced over his knees, he fixed them with a faintly amused, inscrutable look. You've already uncovered my secret, haven't you? Hearing this, George's deathly pitiful expression vanished, and Fred stopped pretending to be reformed. Both twins' eyes shone with admiration as they eagerly offered their compliments to Amasta. Chapter 36, The Twins' Plan. You are the most brilliant wizard I've ever seen, Mr. Breen. No one, not even Headmaster Dumbledore, comes close, Fred exclaimed loudly, marveling at Amasta's ingenuity. The way you monitor the school, we couldn't even dream of it. To better understand your greatness, the twins exchanged a look and reached an unspoken agreement. George, bowing slightly, asked respectfully, Would you explain to us exactly how that thing works? Not a chance. Amasta rolled his eyes so hard it almost hurt. Thinking of Bill, who was excellent in every way, and Charlie, a prodigy at Quidditch, he couldn't fathom how the Weasleys had produced these two. Still, he had to admit, Fred and George were kind of fun. At the rejection, George flopped back onto his bed with a thud, looking deeply wounded. He weakly reached out a hand to his brother and whispered, Looks like my dying wish will never be fulfilled, Fred. If you ever figure it out, promise me you'll tell me at my grave. In the end, Amasta didn't reveal the mechanics of the surveillance system to the twins, not out of selfishness, but because it truly couldn't be explained in a few words. It involved layers of advanced transfiguration and alchemical principles. Even if he tried, they wouldn't understand, let alone recreate it. Still, he generously decided not to punish Fred and George for breaking into his office. They had nothing to do with the Chamber of Secrets. Remember, keep what you saw to yourselves, you little troublemakers. Before sending them out, Amasta squinted, letting a cold edge slip into his voice that made the twins tremble. If I find out you've leaked this secret, or tampered with any of the monitoring devices in the castle, 2 Weasley brothers, even Dumbledore won't be able to stop me if I decide to take action. We swear on Percy's prefect badge, sir. We won't tell a single soul, the twins shouted in unison. Let's hope they keep that promise. Amasta thought as he lay down to rest. He knew fully well that keeping the twins entirely silent was impossible. They'd definitely tell Harry, and Harry would almost certainly share with his closest friends. But beyond that, they weren't likely to broadcast the fact that he monitored the students. The trio was trustworthy, as was the Weasley family. Amasta's earlier misconceptions had cost him extra effort that could have been avoided. That night, Harry and Ron returned from the hospital and were immediately pulled aside by Fred and George. The twins led them to a quiet spot near the girls' dormitory staircase. As they explained everything, Harry's expression grew serious, while Ron's jaw dropped wider and wider, disbelief written all over his face. No one noticed a pale figure lingering by the girls' staircase, silently observing before slipping back into the shadows. Wait here, Ron, Harry said, leaping up without looking back. He went to fetch his invisibility cloak. It was clear tonight he and Ron would be spending more time at the hospital. The castle was still dotted with wandering students, but Harry and Ron, cloaked in invisibility, moved carefully down the halls. Their eyes scanned the ceiling as if expecting hidden eyes to be tracking them. What do you make of this, Harry? Strangely, Hermione didn't immediately voice her opinion upon hearing the shocking news. Sitting cross-armed on her bed, she spoke cautiously. Harry kept his head down, green eyes flickering with uncertainty. After a long pause, he said softly, I don't think it's unacceptable. You've got to be mad, Harry, Ron shouted, incredulous. Or did you not hear what Fred and George said? That Breen is secretly watching everyone, without any warning. If this invasion of privacy isn't wrong, then I don't know what is. And I think Fred and George might already be under his control. They actually think it's funny? There are plenty of things you don't understand, Ron, Hermione said sharply. Why can't you try to see this from Harry's perspective? From Harry's perspective, Ron blinked, looking first at Hermione with exasperation, then at Harry's troubled face, suddenly feeling his IQ was lagging behind the team's average. Can someone please, for once, explain this to me? After a long pause with no response, Ron muttered in frustration. Do I even need to say it, Ron? Hermione traced a fingertip over the black fur on her face, a new little habit she'd picked up recently. Monitoring all the students' daily activities without warning isn't exactly noble. It's even, technically, illegal. But Ron, you can't deny it's undeniably effective, isn't it? As long as the heir of Slytherin is caught, all the rumors Harry's been carrying just collapse on their own. He won't have to face those foolish accusations anymore. And think about it, without the headmaster's or the house head's approval, do you really think Mr. Brain would use such a method? At least, next time someone gets attacked, this can at least prove my innocence, Harry mumbled, ashamed of how selfish that sounded. I really don't want to be involved in this at all anymore. Chapter 37, Clouds of Doubt. Time always slips by silently, and before anyone realized it, the first month of the second half of the semester had come to an end. Any exciting or dangerous topic was quickly overshadowed by mundane routine. Amostar, entering Hogwarts in the guise of a board-appointed investigator, had initially caused quite a stir. But his extremely low profile, combined with the fact that 2 months had passed since the last attack, meant that chatter about him faded quickly. Some students had even forgotten there was a Slytherin-born investigator on campus. Of course, some believed that the reason attacks hadn't continued was because the hidden investigator's presence had a subtle, intimidating effect. For Harry, this was the ideal situation. People gradually stopped watching him with suspicious eyes. Even Malfoy, who had been sending Crabbe, Goyle, Daphne, and Pansy in rotation to report Harry to Amostar since the second week of term, seemed to realize how dull that approach had become and finally quieted down. Another piece of good news was that Hermione had finally been freed from the awkward black fur. Madame Pomfrey told them she was preparing to discharge Hermione officially over the weekend. Fred and George, however, had been less cheerful lately. Since discovering how Amostar monitored the school, they no longer dared wander around the castle late at night. Though Amostar appeared approachable, that didn't mean he would tolerate repeated provocations. On Thursday evening at 8 o'clock, Amostar stayed in his office watching Harry and Ron disappear into the Gryffindor common room portrait. Nearly 3 weeks had passed since he posted the announcement. Even Amostar had to admit that his first test had almost entirely failed. What should he do next? Release false reports that the previously attacked students had regained consciousness, or wait longer? Amostar stared at the photograph of him with Grandma Felena on his desk, hesitant. The glass reflected a young face, still tired but less haggard than before. Amostar had to admit he'd underestimated the task's difficulty and the patience of his opponent. His gaze shifted to the notebook above his spell model notes, open to a letter delivered that afternoon from Cacus Flea. Dear Mr. Brain, I apologize for disturbing you in the midst of your assigned task, but there is something I believe you should know. Recently, a previously unknown faction has appeared in the underground world. They are inquiring about the whereabouts and true identity of Gold Viper. Out of curiosity and caution, I investigated and discovered that their leader is the same person who previously commissioned the magical relic exploration mission. At present, I have not determined their purpose in searching for Gold Viper. Additionally, I have learned that Lucius Malfoy has been unusually active lately and seems to be plotting to remove Albus Dumbledore from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Yours faithfully, Amostar rubbed his fingers together, his expression cold, his deep eyes moving repeatedly over the brief text. A group investigating Gold Viper? How interesting. Who could it be? Amostar thought quietly. In the 3 years he had operated under that name in the underground world, honestly, he hadn't exactly made few enemies. If it were anyone he had a life or death grudge against, it would be those big, reckless wolves who always acted without restraint, relying on their thick skin and tough hides. But since even Carcass hadn't been able to identify them, it was unlikely that the person investigating the Golden Viper would be one of those obnoxious werewolves. They never bothered to hide their identities. Carcass had provided too little information, leaving Amasta unable to determine exactly who had taken an interest in him. For now, aside from staying alert, there wasn't much he could do. As for the second point Carcass mentioned, Lucius Malfoy's supposed plan to drive Dumbledore out, Amasta didn't give it much thought. Anyone with half a brain would know Malfoy wasn't capable of pulling off something like that. Carcass had probably included it in his letter as a subtle warning. Since Malfoy and the Greengrass family had firmly opposed sending an investigator previously, if Lucius did somehow manage to temporarily drive Dumbledore out of Hogwarts, it would also mean Amasta himself would be immediately dismissed. That would, of course, completely ruin the mission to find the Slytherin Chamber treasure. With a quiet sigh, Amasta rose and went to his bookshelf, pulling out the Daily Prophet that had been delivered by Owl Monday morning. Most of the official newspaper was filled with peaceful, trivial news, except for a sharp critique by Rita Skeeter of last summer's Muggle Protection Act, which had been in effect for over half a year. Somewhat amusing, if nothing else. But Amasta wasn't interested in Skeeter's notorious gossip and snark. He flipped to page 7, where a small announcement in the lower right corner caught his eye. Open quote. Currently, upon recommendation of the director of Saint-Sinead, Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, and approved by the board, it is confirmed that Adelie Flay has been appointed head of the Department for Rare Infectious Magical Diseases. Miss Flay joined St. Mungo's in September 1975 as a healer, and as of this report, has been with the department for nearly 18 years. Close quote. Was this why Carcass Flay was so eager to claim the commission to search for the Slytherin treasure? Amasta's gaze darkened. Initially, he had assumed whoever posted the commission was just some underworld wizard or dark wizard coveting the Slytherin treasure. But now, it seemed the matter wasn't so simple. Who could have issued this commission? A long list of influential ministry officials flashed through Amasta's mind, yet he couldn't confirm a single answer. Knock, knock, knock. The sudden knock broke his thoughts. He checked the monitors and saw Professor Snape at the door. Snape's nocturnal life was grueling, but occasionally, when he had free time, he would stop by to lend a hand, letting Amasta rest a bit. Usually, though, Snape would send word ahead, never arriving unannounced like this. Since returning to Hogwarts, Snape had shown a distinct coldness toward him, which Amasta had initially found strange. After some reflection, he understood. It was likely that Snape feared if his former master returned, he could get dragged into the mire again. If their close association became widely known, Amasta would be implicated. Snape's deliberate distance was probably a way to protect him. No new developments? Snape, ever brisk, strode into Amasta's office. He glanced at the young man slouched behind the desk, whose pallid, stiff face seemed to shift subtly, perhaps from too much exposure to potion fumes. Nothing notable, Amasta replied, stretching lazily. Here to cover for a class? Dumbledore wants to see you, Snape said, like lips curling in a faint sneer. Perhaps you should prepare for dismissal, Amasta. Chapter 38. The Dark Lord's Curse. Since that night after Christmas, when he first returned to Hogwarts, tonight marked only the second time Amasta entered Dumbledore's office. It wasn't that he feared the contemporary White Wizard, the greatest of their time, but, as the saying goes, it's not the thief you fear, but that he's got his eye on you. Amasta hadn't forgotten how, back in 5th year, after his encounter with that dark witch in the Forbidden Forest, Dumbledore had kept a close watch on him in the days that followed. The circular office looked almost the same as it had during Amasta's visit over a month ago. The only noticeable change was the Phoenix. Once a small fledgling, it had now grown into its juvenile form, its body covered in radiant golden red feathers. At this moment it crouched in the fire basin, tucking its head beneath its wings in a deep sleep, utterly unbothered even by Amasta's footsteps. Dumbledore seemed to be replying to someone when he looked up. His vivid blue eyes sparkled with a warmth far gentler than when Amasta had first met him. "Good evening, Headmaster Dumbledore. I hope I'm not disturbing you," Amasta said, nodding politely. "Professor Snape mentioned you might have something to discuss with me." "Ah, indeed," Dumbledore replied, gesturing for him to sit. His face smiled, though his tone carried a faint reproach. "I'm afraid I have nothing decent to offer you to drink tonight, Amasta, and given your current state, I think you should avoid anything with alcohol altogether." Amasta smiled, but said nothing. He could tell the old man had mischief in mind. After the usual pleasantries, Dumbledore expressed heartfelt gratitude for Amasta's tireless day and night efforts to safeguard the young wizards and subtly conveyed his concern for Amasta's health, even inquiring if he needed a break. Rest? Amasta thought. Did something secret happen that made Dumbledore want to send him away early? Thank you for your concern, Headmaster, Amasta said cautiously, careful not to add a word more. Catching the perpetrator of these attacks is a task assigned by the board. I must be responsible both for my work and for the safety of the students. Until the culprit is uncovered, I will not leave my post of my own accord. Oh, what admirable dedication, Dumbledore said, clearly touched by Amasta's reply. He sniffed, removed his glasses, and wiped the slight moisture from the lenses. Severus and Minerva have both expressed their worries about your overzealous work ethic. They hope you won't be so tense. Even if another attack occurs, it is not your responsibility. Amasta raised an eyebrow, puzzled. Was Dumbledore calling him over just to offer thanks? Especially Minerva, Dumbledore continued. She believes that without more leads, it's far better not to have you spend all your time searching for the culprit. She mentioned this to me over the Christmas holiday, though I must confess I feel a bit ashamed. She seems to think the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor I arranged wasn't entirely competent and delayed the students' learning. As expected, Dumbledore was definitely up to something. Dumbledore fell silent, furrowing his brow in thought. Amasta arched his own eyebrows, mouth twitching, but held back his response. A tense, almost suffocating silence descended. Only Dumbledore's alchemical implements tinkled softly like wind chimes in the background. I suppose I should ask. Amasta finally broke the silence after a long pause. Headmaster Dumbledore, if I refuse your request, you won't have me sent to Nurmengard or Azkaban, will you? Oh, certainly not, Amasta, Dumbledore chuckled. This is entirely my fault. I came to ask for your help. Honestly, sometimes I wish someone could understand my difficulties. Finding a qualified defense against the dark arts professor is far harder than discovering all 12 uses of dragon's blood. Amasta pursed his lips, giving nothing away. There's been an unverified rumor about this position, Headmaster, he said calmly. I cannot deceive you, Amasta. Dumbledore's expression grew serious. Although there is no direct evidence, ever since I refused Voldemort's application for this post, no professor has lasted more than a year in this position. Amasta remained unruffled, saying nothing in response. However, having two Defense Against the Dark Arts professors simultaneously, even for just a few months, I believe the risk is manageable. If you think the risk is manageable, why not teach it yourself? Amasta rolled his eyes inwardly, remaining silent. I can pay your salary for an entire year, Amasta, if you are willing to help these promising young students. Dumbledore's tone was earnest, guiding, and patient. In his office, Amasta sat at his desk, deep in thought. He hadn't agreed to or rejected Dumbledore's request. He had only said he needed time to consider it carefully. The Dark Lord had cursed this position, and the curse was so potent that it had never weakened in decades. Even Dumbledore himself had been unable to neutralize it. Clearly, the Dark Lord had invested significant effort into it at the time. During the Christmas break, Amasta had decided he would never accept a task with such unpredictable risk. So why hadn't he outright refused now? Because his considerations had changed. Before receiving this mission and entering Hogwarts, Amasta had instinctively thought it would only take a few months to complete. Otherwise, the chamber incident would interfere with the adventures the great chosen one, Harry Potter, would face next school year. But reality was likely more complicated. His involvement had already altered the original course of events, which meant that the originally destined outcome had, in fact, changed. If the heir were truly cautious, there would be no need to provoke Amasta unnecessarily. If the heir intended to outlast him in patience, then Amasta, passively waiting for clues, was almost certain to fail in this prolonged struggle, as he could not remain at the school indefinitely. In this situation, the information Harry's small team possessed became crucial. If Harry could provide just one key clue, Amasta was confident he could follow the trail and locate the chamber before anyone else. Amasta had also considered how to further gain Harry's trust. He realized that if he remained labeled as an investigator, it would be difficult to break through the mental barriers Harry and his friends had built. But if he changed his identity, say, became a professor, things might be simpler. At the very least, frequent contact would help foster a friendlier relationship with them. Then, after making his decision, Amasta drew a deep breath. Waving his wand, he cleared the cluttered desk until it gleamed. Let's see how your curse holds up, Dark Lord. Chapter 39. Not to be underestimated. Amasta's desk was spotless. Even the candlesticks and a photo of him with grandmother Florina had been moved elsewhere to avoid damage. Before taking action, he glanced at the monitoring wall opposite him. Hogwarts was peaceful as ever. Nothing unusual was happening. Sighing, Amasta walked to the bedside to retrieve his travel case. He rifled through it and pulled out a most peculiar candlestick. The lower half was a voodoo doll with eyes the size of baby fists, its grinning teeth stretched down past its ears. The doll's head was about half the size of its body, entirely black, with a swollen face frozen in a terrifying smile. Amasta didn't care to investigate the material of the doll. He had purchased the alchemical item on the underground magical market from a wizard in Ouagadougou, Africa. Among the magically advanced civilizations, Ouagadougou was one of the most chaotic regions, largely due to its complex interaction with local Muggle society. Even today, many people lived in tribal communities led by hereditary shaman wizards. These tribal shamans preserved ancient, cruel, and bloody magical traditions. Curses and sacrifices were their specialty. Frankly, even a powerful wizard like Amasta avoided provoking these fanatics. The upper half of the voodoo doll candlestick was a transparent tube meant to hold candle wax. Since the doll had never been used, the tube was immaculately clean. Next came the task of preparing the candle wax. Amasta reached into the chest once more and soon pulled out a bottle of dragon's blood, its hue a deep, vivid crimson. This blood came from the Norwegian ridgeback he had drained earlier. At the time, he had collected a large quantity, but fearing that using too much at once might draw the ministry's attention, he had kept a substantial reserve. It was well known that almost every part of a fire-breathing dragon was valuable, especially the blood and nerves, which were rich in magical energy, perfect ingredients for potions and spellwork. He poured the dragon's blood into the transparent tube atop the voodoo doll's head, studying the faintly rippling liquid as the crimson mist hovered above it. Satisfied, Amasta nodded. Now came the part that required a small personal sacrifice. He shook his sleeve and bared his arm. In the dim light, a flash of dark silver cut through the air, and his blood surged forth, coalescing under the influence of magic into a winding stream that precisely merged with the dragon's blood in the tube. The ominous magical energy in the office seemed to swallow the light around it. The candle on the bookshelf dimmed gradually, as if dust had settled over it. Amasta's expression was solemn. In his pale purple eyes, twin vortices swirled slowly as he continuously twitched his wand. Gray light spilled from its tip, forming black, tadpole-like runes that seemed alive, swimming through the air before him, leaving faint ink-like traces in their wake. Go! At Amasta's authoritative command, hundreds of the tadpole runes surged toward the mixture of dragon's blood and his own, like birds returning to their nests. A strange breeze stirred in the quiet office, the runes pushing the liquid into spirals. Tiny bolts of crimson electricity sparked across the concave surface, dazzling and alarming to behold. Amasta continued pouring in magical energy, a grayish current that catalyzed the fusion of the magic within the runes and that within the dragon's blood. Slowly, the blood thickened from a liquid into a viscous mass. Before it fully solidified, he plucked a tuft of hair from his head and dropped it in. At last, a crimson candle with a wick at its core had been formed. In the dim light, Amasta wiped a non-existent sweat from his brow, shoulders relaxing slightly, though his expression remained tense. Poof! When ignited, the candle blazed nearly 3 feet high, its golden yellow flames tinged with an eerie gray halo. From a distance, it looked as if a torch were thrust into the head of the voodoo doll. By all rights, a candle burning so fiercely should have lasted only a few minutes before extinguishing. Yet this bizarre candle's thick body showed no signs of shrinking, as if the wax and wick themselves were never being consumed. It's up to you now. Amasta's eyelashes fluttered slightly as he whispered the words. Then, standing straight before the voodoo doll, he raised his wand tipped toward the sky, his expression solemn, his low voice ringing like a formal oath. I, Amostar Brain, voluntarily accept the invitation of Hogwarts headmaster Albus Dumbledore to serve as assistant professor of defense against the dark arts. Buzz. The moment the oath concluded, the air in the office shuddered violently. A powerful, malevolent force, an enforced curse, descended on Amasta, transcending time and space. For a moment, he could hear the agonized wails of countless souls, tortured and murdered, as if echoing from the brink of death. At that instant, far away in the circular office on the 8th floor, Albus Dumbledore stirred from his reverie. He snapped his head toward Amasta's office, his piercing blue eyes seeming to penetrate the walls themselves, observing Amasta's actions as if he were on the scene. The curse Voldemort had laid upon him was deflected by Amasta's prepared substitute. Yet the actual curse, having entered the voodoo doll, quickly realized it had been deceived. A furious roar echoed from the void. The curse's energy coalesced into a tangible, rapidly expanding dark bubble. Encasing the voodoo doll, it surged toward Amasta. As the substitute magic threatened to fail, Amasta remained calm. His eyelids flickered. His furrowed brows lent his usually cold expression and added gravity. Just as the dark bubble was about 2 feet from him, he suddenly retracted his raised right hand, pressing the wand tip firmly against the manifested curse. Whoosh! The expanding curse collided with the unyielding magic streaming from Amasta's wand, generating a relentless gust that swept through the office. Every corner shimmered with fleeting gray sparks. Even the surveillance screens flickered violently under the raging magical energy that enveloped the floor. The mysterious vortices in Amasta's eyes whirled again, a faint, almost imperceptible glow enveloping him. The magic from his wand surged like tidal waves under a storm, each stronger than the last. Over time, the curse's bubble lost ground, shrinking inch by inch, forced back into the voodoo doll. When it finally vanished, a thin crack appeared across the doll's high, sneering nose, and the once raging magical flame suddenly dropped to a third of its original height, as if struck by some unseen force. In the circular office, Dumbledore's lips curved into a wry smile. Unconsciously, he stood, hand resting on Fawkes' claw, then slowly sat back down. Meanwhile, Professor Lockhart, who shared the third-floor office, had originally been rubbing his eyes in exasperation and preparing to head to the staff dormitory for a nap. For some inexplicable reason, however, he suddenly froze mid-motion, feeling an unexpected surge of energy coursing through his tired, irritable body, as if he had just downed a whole bottle of a vitality elixir. "Oh, lucky little Nakanica!" Lockhart grinned gleefully and returned to his desk. Drawing a magnificent peacock feather quill from his penholder, he began writing furiously. "Congratulations on receiving my reply a whole day early. Indeed, not the easiest to deal with, eh?" In the Amasta gazed at the voodoo doll, its face lined with tiny wrinkles, and finally allowed himself a relaxed smile. Chapter 40, Life as a Professor. The last day of January happened to fall on a weekend. The weather was fine, and the bright morning sun glinted off the shimmering lake. Along the shore, the newly sprouted willow leaves and vibrant green grass swayed gently in the spring-kissed breeze, filling the air with a sense of tranquil contentment. On the Quidditch pitch, all 4 house teams appeared simultaneously, each in uniforms of vastly different styles and colors. After a series of challenging and at times heated negotiations, each team claimed a corner of the pitch and began running drills. However, to protect their core tactics, only Hufflepuff played with open eyes. The other 3 teams deliberately held back their true skill from their opponents. Having spent 2 days adjusting his biological clock, Amasta stood at a window, gazing over a lively Hogwarts. The wind ruffled his soft gray hair, and he felt a rare, genuine sense of pleasure. He resolved that any future commissions requiring consecutive night shifts would have to come with a fee at least 20% above the market rate. As he walked through the castle, young witches and wizards gave him surprised glances. Almost everyone knew that the investigator sent by the Board of Governors had habits similar to a bat, never appearing by day, only moving at night. Seeing him in daylight was rarer than spotting a mountain troll in the castle. In the Great Hall, a few late-rising students sat scattered about. At the staff table, Professors Flitwick, Sprout, and Snape whispered together. Seeing Amasta approach, Flitwick immediately rose from his seat to offer congratulations. "We were just talking about you," he said, lowering his sharp voice. "We've already heard this